The buggy came up our lane twice a year, once in April, once in October. I could hear it before I could see it. That particular rhythm, slower than a neighbor's, heavier. And when I heard it, I would stop whatever I was doing. Bread half kneaded, wash half hung, and I would go stand at the kitchen window with my hands still wet and watch the black shape come up between the fence posts. My husband would already be walking out to meet him, hat in hand, head slightly lowered, and I would stand in that kitchen and know that in about 10 minutes the two of them would come inside, and my husband would put on his coat and go out to the barn, and the bishop and I would be alone in my own front room. The door closed, and nobody in that house, and nobody on that road, and nobody in that church district would think anything of it at all, because that was allowed. Before I say another word, let me tell you who I am. My name is Anna. I am 68 years old. I was born Old Order Amish in a settlement in Holmes County, Ohio, and I lived under the Ordnung for 51 years before I walked out of it. This is Hannah the Amish Girl, the channel where women like me finally say the things our community spent our entire lives teaching us not to say. If you want to hear the truth about Amish life from women who actually lived inside it, subscribe and tap the like button. And in the comments, tell me one thing. Had you ever heard the word abrot before today? I want to know. I read every single comment. Now let me explain what that word means, because you need to understand the structure before you can understand what happened in my front room. In an Old Order Amish church district, the bishop is not a pastor the way English people think of a pastor. He is not chosen because he studied. He is not chosen because he wanted the job. He is chosen by lot. The men of the district nominate candidates. Hymn books are set out on a table. One of them has a slip of paper inside it, and whichever man picks up that book, that is your bishop for life. There is no committee above him. There is no appeal. There is no bishop of bishops. In my district, that man had final authority over every question of faith, every question of conduct, every question of who was in fellowship and who was under the ban. He decided who was baptized. He decided who was married. He decided who was shunned. He decided whether the man you loved was still allowed to eat at your table. And he decided what happened inside your marriage. Because the Ordnung, our unwritten rule of order, the thing that governs everything from the width of a hat brim to the color of a buggy top, did not stop at the front door of a house. It went inside. It went into the kitchen. It went into the bedroom. And twice a year, in the spring and in the fall, before communion, the bishop came to make sure it had. Let me give you the official rules of the visit exactly as they were taught to me. First, before every communion service, and there are two, a year, spring and fall, the bishop and the ministers must visit every household in the district. This is called the abrot. It means the council visit. Second, the purpose is to determine whether the household is at peace, whether every member is in full agreement with the Ordnung, whether communion can proceed. Third, communion cannot be held unless every single member of the district is in unity. One person out of order, and the whole district waits. Every soul in that community depends on every other soul being right, which means if you speak, you are not only ruining yourself, you are ruining communion for 300 people who will all know exactly whose fault it was. Fourth, the bishop speaks to the husband, then he speaks to the wife, separately, behind a closed door. Fifth, The wife is asked whether she is in submission to her husband, whether she keeps a plain house, whether her covering is worn properly at all hours, whether she has any complaint that would prevent unity. Sixth, anything spoken in that room stays in that room. It is not gossip. It is counsel. Seventh, if a wife is found to be out of order, the bishop may counsel her privately. He may counsel her repeatedly. He may require her to make a confession before the church, on her knees, in front of every person she has ever known. Eighth, a woman does not question a bishop. To question the bishop is hochmut, pride, and pride is the root of every sin we had. Ninth, there is no one else to tell, because the bishop is the one you would tell. And tenth, and this is the one that has taken me nearly 2 decades to be able to say out loud, the wife's own account of her marriage is not evidence. It is a symptom. If she is unhappy, the question is never what was done to her. The question is what is wrong with her heart. Those are the rules. Now let me tell you what actually happened in my front room. I was married at 19. My husband was 22. His name was Jonas. And I want you to hold on to something before I go any further, because it matters more than almost anything else I will say today. Jonas was not a cruel man. He was a quiet man. He built our kitchen table. He carried me down the stairs the winter I broke my ankle. When our first baby was born blue and did not breathe for 11 seconds, he was the one who stood in the corner with his hands over his face while the midwife worked, and he never once in 50 years let me carry that memory alone. And he was the one who put on his coat twice a year and walked out to the barn. He did not know. I need you to hear that too. He had been raised in the same silence I was raised in. He had been told his entire life that a bishop's counsel was holy ground, that a man does not stand at the door of it, that to wonder about it was itself a sin. The information gap in a community like mine does not only trap the women, it builds the walls out of the men. The first abroad after our wedding, I was 20. I sat on the edge of a hard chair in my own front room, with my hands folded in my lap, and my heart going like a bird in a jar. The bishop sat across from me. He was maybe 50 then. He had a low voice, very calm, very slow, the kind of voice that makes you feel you are being handled carefully. He asked me if the house was in order. I said yes. He asked me if my covering was worn at all hours, including at night. I said yes. He asked me if I was in full submission to my husband in all things, and I said yes. And then he was quiet for a long time, long enough that I looked up, and he said, "In all things, Anna." I understood what he was asking. I understood it in my body before I understood it in my mind, the way you understand a stair that is not there. And I said yes again, and I looked at the floor, and my ears were roaring, and he wrote nothing down, because nothing was ever written down. Then he said, "Gut," and he stood up, and he opened the door and called for Jonas. And Jonas came in from the barn with sawdust on his sleeves and cold in his coat. And the bishop shook his hand and said the household was in unity, and communion could proceed. That was the first one. It lasted 19 minutes. I know because I looked at the clock when he came in, and I looked at it when he left, and I have never been able to stop knowing that number. There were 61 more. Now I want to tell you about Rebecca. Rebecca was married about 4 years before I was in the same district, and her farm was the second one past ours. We used to trade eggs across the fence. She was a small woman with very red hands from the wash water, and a laugh that would come out of her sideways when she was not expecting it. And one summer, at a quilting frolic, in a back room where the light came in gray and dusty, and 8 of us were working on a wedding ring pattern, Rebecca put her needle down in the middle of a row. Nobody puts their needle down in the middle of a row. And she said, to nobody looking at the quilt, "Does he ask you the second question?" The room went so quiet I could hear a horse switching its tail outside. And an older woman, a woman who had been in that district her entire life and had buried a husband and 4 children, did not look up from her stitching, and she said, "We do not name it." And she said it kindly. That is the part I want you to understand. She said it kindly, like she was protecting Rebecca, like she was handing her the only thing she had, and Rebecca picked her needle back up. That was the entire conversation. 9 words and a needle, and it was the closest thing to help I received in 31 years. I want you to understand what that moment actually was, because I did not understand it for decades. That was not one woman failing another woman. That was a woman with nothing to give, giving the only thing she had, which was the rule that keeps you alive in a place where being alive means never being seen to have a wound. She was not shutting Rebecca up. She was telling her how to survive. And I sat there. I said nothing. I had my answer to Rebecca's question. It was sitting in my mouth like a stone, and I swallowed it, and I finished the row. I have spent more nights awake over that row than over any Abrat. What happened over the next 11 Sundays? I cannot carry it in 20 minutes. There are things this recording cannot hold. The names, the counting, the drawer, the dress I kept for 27 years. 3 years ago, I wrote it all down. The book is called The Sundays. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. Now, I need to explain the machinery, because if you only hear the story, you will think this was one bad man in one bad district, and that is not what this is. There are 3 things that made it possible, and none of them are secret. Every one of them was taught to me from a bench in a church service before I was old enough to read. The first is Gelassenheit, yielding. It is the central virtue of Amish life, and I will not pretend it is only a weapon, because it is not. Gelassenheit is what makes a whole community show up with hammers when your barn burns. It is what fed my family for a month when Jonas was under the horse. It is real, and it is beautiful, and I miss it. And it also means you do not have a self that can be wronged. You have a self that must be surrendered. And when a woman is taught for 50 years that the highest expression of her faith is to stop defending her own boundary, then you do not need locks. You do not need threats. She will hold the door for you. The second is that the ban is total. In some communities, the shunning is partial. In my district, under the Meidung, it was not. If I had been placed under the ban, I could not have eaten at the same table as my own children. My husband could not have accepted anything from my hand. Not a plate, not a cup, not a coat. 51 years of every single person I had ever loved, and the man who decided whether I kept them or lost them was the man sitting in the chair across from me, asking me if I was in submission. That is not counsel. That is not spiritual authority. That is a hand on a switch. And the third is the silence. And I have thought about this one for 20 years, and I have come to believe it is the worst of the 3, because the first 2 are visible. Everyone can see the Ordnung. Everyone can see the ban. Nobody can see a thing that has no word. We had no word, not in Pennsylvania Dutch and not in English. We had no word for what happened in that front room, which meant that when I lay awake at night with my heart going, I could not think about it. I could only feel it. And feeling something you cannot name is not a thought, it is a weather. It comes and it goes, and it does not accumulate into anything you could ever say out loud. There was one October when I was 28 that I decided I would tell my mother. I had it planned for 4 days. I was going to say it while we were putting up tomatoes, because your hands are busy and your eyes have somewhere else to go. And that is how women in my world said hard things, sideways, into a task. And I got as far as, "Ma'am, when the bishop comes for the abrat," and she said, without stopping, without looking, in the flattest voice I have ever heard come out of her, "Anna, he is the bishop." And she kept working. And I have thought about that sentence for 40 years, and here is what I finally know. That was not a refusal. That was a confession. She was not telling me that nothing was wrong. She was telling me that she had already been where I was standing, and there had been nothing there, and she was begging me not to go looking. She was handing me the only thing she had, the same thing that woman handed Rebecca. I want to tell you about the last one. I was 50, which means my hair was gray under the covering and my hands looked like Rebecca's, and I had raised 7 children in that house. And there is a thing that happens to a woman around 50 in a community like mine, and I have never heard anyone describe it, so I will try. You become invisible. And invisibility is the first freedom anyone ever gave me. He came in April. He was old by then. He walked with a stick, and he took the good chair, and he asked me if the house was in order, and I said yes. And he asked if I was in full submission to my husband in all things. And I looked at him, and I did not say anything. I want to be very clear that I did not refuse. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I did not say a single word. I simply did not answer, and I let the silence sit down in that room like a third person. And I looked at him, and I watched him understand that I was not going to fill it. 19 seconds, I know, because I was watching the clock. The same clock. And he said, "Gut," and he stood up. And he called for Jonas. And I have thought about that April every day since, and here is what I finally understand. He was not stronger than me. He never had been. He was an old man with a stick in a farmhouse kitchen, and the only thing he ever had, the only thing for 31 years, was my belief that he had it. That is what they built. Not a prison, a belief. I left at 51. Jonas died in the February, and I want to say something honest about that, because people always want the clean version. I did not leave because I stopped loving him. I left because he was the last wall. And when the last wall comes down, you find out you were never actually the one holding it up. The letters came back unopened. 2 of my 7 children still speak to me, and they call from a phone in an English neighbor's barn, and we do not talk about any of this, and I have made my peace with that, mostly, on the good days. And then a therapist gave me a word. I was 54 years old, in a small office with a fern in it, and I told her the whole thing the way I have told you, flat, in order, the way you tell a thing you have no word for. And she listened. And when I was finished, she was quiet for a while. And then she said something I have carried every single day since. She said, "Anna, a man who can end your entire world cannot be given your consent. He can only be given your compliance. And those are not the same thing. And you have been punishing yourself for 31 years for the difference. And I did not cry in that office. I got out to the parking lot, and I sat in the car, and I put both hands on the wheel, and I cried. The way you cry when something that has been standing on your chest since you were 20 finally steps off. I want to close this honestly. That community gave me things I will carry into my grave. It gave me a work ethic that has not failed me one single day. It gave me neighbors who raised a barn in a day and never mentioned it again. It gave me a faith that is wounded and complicated and rebuilt and still somehow mine. But there is no scripture that makes a woman's obedience the property of the man who counsels her. There is no ordnung that survives the moment it is used to keep a woman quiet in her own front room. And there is no God I believe in now who ever intended that a woman should be made to hold the door herself. They told me the door was closed for counsel. It was closed for the counselor. If you were ever raised in a place where the only person you could report to was the person you would have been reporting, I see you. If you ever gave a yes with your mouth that your whole body was screaming against, and then spent 30 years believing that yes was a sin you committed, I want you to hear an old woman say this once, plainly. That was not your yes. You never had a no to give. And a yes with no no in the room was never a yes at all. I was not a woman who consented. I was a woman with nowhere to stand. If something in this stayed with you, leave me a comment and tell me what it was. Tell me your story, if you are ready, and if you want to keep hearing from behind the prayer cap. Subscribe to Hannah the Amish Girl. The Sundays, what 20 minutes cannot hold. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. The morning is yours, if you decide it is. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.